Welcome to the Everything Made Beautiful podcast with Shannon Scott. This program is sponsored by Kava, home of streaming Bible studies, teaching series, and workshops to deepen your faith. Check them out at Kava, QAVA.tv. And now, on with the show.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Today on the podcast, you are getting the privilege of hearing from my friend, Lauren Chandler. Lauren and I were connected by our friend, Christy Nockels, and I've so enjoyed getting to know Lauren and see in an up-close and personal way what I once admired from afar, and that is her genuine heart for Jesus and a desire to follow him in a real, tangible, and intimate way. Now, Lauren loves to ask questions and isn't a big fan of talking about herself, so I'm really thankful that she did this podcast. She loves to accumulate knowledge and would tell you that random facts about meteorology and history and movie trivia are her jam. But she is first and foremost loved by Jesus and finds that if she starts from any other place related to her identity, things start to break down. Lauren's married to Matt, who is the pastor of the Village Church in Texas, and they have 3 children together. She speaks and teaches at churches, enjoys studying God's Word, and loves writing books, Bible studies, songs, and even 2 children's books, which we'll talk about today. More than anything, though, she loves to stir up people's hearts to know, receive, and connect with the God of the universe who loves them, and particularly loves doing that through worship. Now, one of my favorite things to do on this podcast is to introduce you to people who've made a significant impact on my life, and Lauren is one of those people. We couldn't talk about all the ways she's done that today, so she's definitely going to have to come back. But this conversation was so meaningful to me, and I trust it will be for you too. So without further delay, sit back and enjoy this sweet conversation with my friend, Lauren Chandler. Well, hello, Lauren. Thank you so much for joining us on the Everything Made Beautiful podcast. It is good to see your face.
It's good to see you too, Shannon. I love it. I'm so honored to be on this podcast.
Well, I'm grateful that you said yes, and I've already done the official bio that everyone has heard, but I just want to say it's been so fun to get to know you through, our mutual friend, Christy. We have, first of all, got a sweet little circle of people that she has connected us to, but getting to spend some time with you, getting to go to the beach and just hang out and be casual. I have been so inspired by your faith walk, inspired by the way that you talk about God's faithfulness to you and your family. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to have more people hear from you because it's so sweet and inspiring. So thank you. Truly. Thank you for doing this.
Absolutely. And yeah, Christy, she is a beautiful, unique soul who brings people together. I know if she likes them, I'm going to like them. And you are the perfect example of that. Still got the humor, sweet and thoughtful and deep, but also really funny. And that is really important to me.
Thank you for saying I'm sweet. I don't hear that a lot. I have another friend who calls me her sweet Shannon. And so we always joke because I'm like, whoa, that doesn't happen a lot. So thank you. That means a lot to me.
Well, I mean it.
Well, thank you. Well, I know so many people are probably familiar with you or your work or know of you, but I just kind of like to start back at the beginning. Give us kind of the origin story of Lauren Chandler and how you grew up and kind of what has brought you to where we are today.
Yeah, I love origin stories, and I'm really into roots. I have a subscription to ancestry.com, and I use that thing all the time. I think it's so fascinating to know where we've come from, who we've come from. So I love origin stories. I grew up in a believing home, my mom and dad. Actually, it's really neat. It's part of my origin story. I feel like I've got to tell a little bit of their story. They are both babies in their family. They're the third born. And so a lot of fun. But also, Yeah, I love my parents. They're wonderful. And I still have a great relationship with them now. They don't live too far away, but they found themselves at a crossroad at Stephen F. Austin in Nacogdoches, which is not your bastion of probably Christian living,
Mm.
especially in the 70s. But they had roots in the church and knew Jesus growing up, had strayed a bit, and then they kind of found each other and started like together, hey, we want to go back to church, return to the Lord. And so they did that. And so their faith was super important in my home growing up. And they weren't in ministry. They were just loving Jesus as husband and wife, as a CPA, as a stay-at-home mom, as my mom also worked for my grandparents. My grandfather, his family owned a funeral home in East Texas.
Oh,
Longview is my
wow.
hometown. So I had a little bit of a my girl experience growing up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would, after middle school, my middle school was down the road from the funeral home. And so I would walk over after school to the funeral home because my mom was usually working. And probably even before I was in middle school, I would go over. This sounds so crazy, but it was just like death was just a part of life to
Wow.
us. I mean, it was normal. That's all like I knew that we live and then, yeah, there's going to be a day that we die. And so they have what they're called state rooms. And it's when it's a room, and my mom helped decorate it, make it look real pretty. I think we had 3 or 4. Each one of them had a different theme. And that's where the bodies would lie in state. So with in a casket with it open. So people who wanted to kind of pay their last respects or
Yeah, the
whatever,
viewing.
the
Yeah.
viewing, okay, they would do that. So I go in there and I would look and I would just look at the people. And
Oh my
so
gosh,
this
I'm
was like
freaked
so
out.
normal to me. And I didn't realize that that is not normal. So
Yeah.
anyway, so grew up in Longview. My mom grew up there. Her family, her roots went real deep in Longview. We went to First Baptist Church. I have a younger brother. I was the princess whose parade got rained on by my little brother showing up.
Mm-hmm.
I did not like the idea of having to share attention, but my poor little brother, he's wonderful. He's grown with married to a beautiful wife and has 2 beautiful daughters, and we keep in touch. They live about 5 hours away from us, but so my relationship with my brother was a lot of love, but a lot of like sibling rivalry too. And then when I was 8 years old, my mom, she was like, hey, have you ever considered inviting Jesus into your heart?
Mm.
And I was like, yeah, I mean, duh. That's like the no brainer decision for me. I'd grown up knowing who he was, going to Sunday school, sitting in church with my family, feeling like I had like some kind of relationship with the Lord. At least felt his wooing as a little kid. And I was like, it felt like the most natural thing. Like, yes, I want to follow Jesus. And so, yeah, my mom pretty much shared the gospel with me. And then
Mm.
I met with our pastor and he shared some things too. And I prayed with him and um, was baptized a little bit later. And as far as I could understand, um, I loved Jesus and I was like, I want to live for him all my days. I definitely was a good girl, rule
Mm.
follower, wanted to do things right. And I also, I loved school. My parents did not have to pay me for grades, which is that I'm all for it. Like some kind of incentive. I needed no incentive to make all the
Yeah.
A's. I was like, I want the A.
Mm-hmm.
Do not give me a B. Whatever I can do, whatever it takes to get the A. And so definitely a perfectionist, definitely a high achiever. And Also loved music. I had lots of good memories sitting at our piano growing up, or my grandparents' piano, and just remembering kind of feeling the presence of God with me. I don't think I knew that's what it was then, but when I think back on it, there was just a sweet sadness is all I can tell you, where it was just something that was beyond, um, beyond what I could really comprehend or grasp. And that's all I can describe it as, a sweet sadness. There was that longing, that, what C.S. Lewis calls joy with a capital J, that Sehnsucht, I think is what
Yes.
the German word is for it, where it's like this sweet sadness of longing for something more. And that's where I felt it a lot, was sitting at the piano bench, just wanting to create something, or just kind of sight reading or playing from ear. And then another place I found that was in my backyard. We had a real big backyard with a creek running in the back of it, and just being outside in nature. My grandparents had a ranch where they raised cows, and they had feed corn. They grew feed corn, and just going on all the little cow trails or game trails that were carved out, and their pastures were some of my sweetest memories growing up. So I had a real sweet childhood, parents that loved each other. I loved my brother, even though he probably didn't think I did. and um, and grew up like with lots of sweet friends at the same church, had a great youth group.
Now I'm interested, you
Yeah.
said, and this sounds a lot like how
Mm-hmm.
I grew up. It's like Christian home, parents on staff at a church. We were at the same
Yeah.
church my entire childhood into
Mm-hmm.
young adulthood. High achiever, perfectionist, didn't have to be incentivized for grades because I
Yep.
wanted to be perfect.
Yep.
I'm wondering for you, did that ever cross over? Yeah, I came to know Jesus when I was 7, but I definitely struggled with a legalistic relationship.
Definitely. Mm-hmm.
I have attributed some of that to, I went to a Christian school that was
Mm.
wonderful. I mean, I loved it, and it's
Yeah.
actually only now that I see some of the things, because my kids are also in a private school, and I see some
Yeah.
of the ways that over the years we've tried to not make spiritual or biblical something that's not,
Yes.
in trying to set appropriate boundaries for behavior or what have you. But
Yes.
I struggled with legalism, even from very, very well-meaning people who were
Yeah.
lovely, and I adore them to this day. But did you find that as well, with that high
Oh, yeah.
achiever, perfectionist side, that grace is a little bit more difficult for me to grasp than punishment or discipline?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And, you know, I'm sure I heard grace in the gospel when I was that age. I just think how I'm put together, it was just really hard to sink in. I
Yeah.
remember it might not have been until college that I really understood what grace was,
Yeah, same.
because, I was kind of nailing it. I was kind of doing okay. And
Yeah,
even if I didn't nail it, I could just, get frustrated with myself and just do better next time and try harder
right,
next time,
right.
So I feel like it wasn't until college that I really understood grace. And maybe I'd take that back. There was a moment. So was just kind of the poster kid of the youth group, was
Mhm.
in choir, was in an ensemble. And there was a lot of internal struggles. And one of, kind of around music and singing, where
Yeah,
I compared myself a lot. I felt a lot of competition there. And so a lot of ugliness came out there, and a lot of frustration
yeah,
was manifested there. And so I could kind of feel that. And then probably my junior year of high school, I'd been a good girl. I'd done
mhm.
all the right things, gone to youth group, had uh, didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't hang out with those kinds of people.
Yeah, yeah.
And so thinking, I can do it. I can stay a good girl. And honestly, that's what I want. I want for my kids to not have
Yeah.
to have lots of regrets. I
Yeah.
really, I pray for that. But there was like just kind of a moment after my junior year of high school where it was, I just kind of was like, well, I deserve to be a little mischievous,
Mhm.
and kind of gave in to that. And it wasn't even anything serious. It wasn't like earth shattering, but to me, when I kind of got caught, it was like the whole world was
Yeah.
caving in on me. And
Yes.
my mom tells me this much later. When I like confessed to her what it was, she said internally it was this huge sigh of relief because she just
Yeah.
thought I was pregnant, and
Yes,
so
exactly.
and it was
Totally.
nowhere close to that, not even
Yeah.
yeah. And so and the thing is, like, the Lord can work even if it had been, pregnancy. But anyway, the Lord just started to break my heart over I can't do it. And I
Yeah.
remember,
Yep.
look, I missed the mark, and I'm not as good as I thought I was. And instead of being okay, I can just do better, it was this, my faith is more than just being a good girl and doing the right thing. My
Yeah.
faith is in a real God who loves and forgives, and I want to grow that relationship. And what's kind of neat is it was around that time that I met Matt.
Mm.
So our story is it sounds scandalous. It was not scandalous. But that summer after my junior year of high school, and I was always just an old soul. I love to be around adults.
Yeah.
When we would go on youth groups trips, I was always with the adults, talking to them, and so that summer I went to camp, and Matt was our camp speaker. Now he was only like
Okay.
22, maybe he just turned 23, so he was older, but like
Yeah.
I'm, late in high school, about to be 18. And so anyway, but we connected,
Scandalous.
I know, so scandalous, but we connected. But first, what drew me to Matt had nothing to do with his personality or his looks, no matter what he says. It was, I just hadn't seen that kind of passion for Jesus.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen someone who was so thoroughly convinced of God's love and grace for them. And
Mm.
I just remember being like, I want that. Whatever that is, I want it. I want to love him like he seems to love Jesus. I want to be convinced
Yeah.
of Jesus's love for me like he is, like whatever that is. I want that. And so I was very drawn to him, not romantically at first, but more like, I want to love Jesus like that. And so that that's how I got to know Matt, or how I met him. And my dad was on the trip as like a sponsor,
Mm.
a counselor, and my little brother was there. So they met him, and my dad kind of established a relationship with Matt. He was a CPA at the time, and he was like, any way that I can serve you. So he was helping Matt form a 501c3 corporation. And so they stayed in touch, and I was working for my dad that summer. So
Mhm.
Matt would call the office and I would answer. And
Mhm.
then, and then he'd start calling the house and I would answer. And so it was kind of the slow progressions towards more than just, friendship. And
Yeah.
so, and my parents, I mean, he was very respectful of my parents and asking, for their blessing on the
Yeah.
relationship. And my parents kind of helped the relationship happen. They invited him to stay at our house when he was driving, like kind of not cross country, but from Abilene to, I think he was going to Missouri or something. He was like, hey, break up your trip and you can stay here. We have an extra bedroom. Or actually, at that point, we didn't have an extra bedroom, and he had to be in a bunk with my brother. So I think my brother did go to the top bunk so Matt could have the lower bunk. But
Yeah.
And so he became a friend of our family, and then he became eventually my boyfriend.
Yes.
And so we dated my senior year of high school. And I remember seeking the Lord on where I would go for college. And what was so neat is the summer that I met him, I was also in Texas Baptist All-State Choir.
Okay.
And the camp was at Hardin-Simmons University in Abilene, where Matt was in school. And so I remember walking the campus and praying, Lord, if this is where I'm supposed to be, even if Matt and I don't work out, would you give me a peace about it? And he did. And so I had made plans to go to Hardin-Simmons. And so I had my senior year of high school. It was hard because I think your senior year, whatever kind of high school career you've had, as far as like what you're going for, I would say even socially kind of cements. And I had friends that wanted to do a little bit more of the party scene. And then I had friends that wanted to be more serious. And then, I had a college boyfriend. So it made for an interesting time that I ended up spending a lot of time with my parents that year. And it was actually really sweet.
Yeah.
And then went off to Hardin-Simmons and was a freshman there. Halfway through my freshman year, Matt asked me to marry him. And I said yes. And so we got married the summer after my freshman year of high school. Of college, not high
Now
school.
that would be scandalous.
That would be scandalous. Yeah, no. I was 19 when we got married. And we're about to celebrate 25 years tomorrow, which is
happy anniversary.
Thank you.
Okay, so that means you got
crazy.
married in 99 like
99.
we did.
Yes.
Yes.
What's your anniversary? What's the date?
May 14th.
May 14th. Yeah. Oh, happy
Which is
25.
so funny because you telling your story, I'm like, yep, that's how I grew up. I was a voice major in college. Like I was young. Now Jeff is 10 years older than me, but I was young as well. So that's so awesome. Was Matt your first boyfriend?
I had a few boyfriends before him, but nothing very serious. I had a couple, and one of them, my parents prayed away, and which is so
I had
good.
One or two.
Yeah, I had a couple of those. I just know my parents were praying, like, get that boy out of here, and he did. So, the Lord, I felt, I didn't make any major. There was no serious relationship before Matt. Matt was my most serious relationship. So, which I'm kind of like, I love it. And our oldest daughter, same thing for her. Like her only serious relationship is now her husband, and Reed's and kind of, he's really only had one. He's had like another girlfriend, but one that's lasted a little bit longer. And I'm like, did we start a trend? We didn't mean to start that. We're kind of like, And I really, our son's girlfriend just is sweet, but I'm also kind of like, you don't have to do what we did. You can, slow it down anyway.
Yeah.
But
yeah. You don't have to get married super young.
No, you don't.
But you do have a son-in-law now.
I do have a seventh son-in-law, which is awesome. And he is wonderful. And we love Adam, and he's such a blessing. He treats Audrey so well. And so we love Adam. And what's real sweet is he and my dad, they like have a relationship. They text all the time. And I just think that's so neat. So yes.
Yeah, what a great legacy.
Yeah.
And you've got three kiddos. So you've got Audrey, Reed,
and Nora. So Audrey's 21, just got married in November. Reed's 18, just graduated, and heading off to actually a local junior college to do this program where he'll learn to work on Toyota and Lexus vehicles. He's loves the hands-on kind of stuff. And so we're excited for him. And then Nora, she's going to be a sophomore in high school. And so she's made a big change from her little Christian school to now our local huge public high school, which is
a big change.
Great. Like a lot of our friends, kids go there. And the football games are real fun. You get to do moms, and in Texas, moms are like a whole thing.
A whole
I don't,
thing. I mean, you are Friday Night Lights. Like
we
that
are
is your
Friday
life.
Night Lights. This is our life. So,
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I love how big the mums have gotten, but I do
Yeah.
think mums are fun.
Aw.
So, yeah. So, we got married. I was 19. And then we ended up moving to the Dallas area. Then Matt interviewed to become the pastor of Highland Village First Baptist Church. He
Mhm.
was 28. I was 22 and 8 months pregnant with our firstborn.
Mhm.
And so we moved to the area, and I actually loved it because before he had been an itinerant minister. So I graduated college a little bit early because, I'm going to get
Yeah.
it
High
done.
achiever.
High achiever, summa cum laude. But I got a B in a class in, I forgot what year it was. And it was probably my first and only B. And I was so mad because I felt
Yeah.
like it was a professor who would not tell me what they wanted. I'm like, you
Right.
tell me what you want and I can do it. And I'd take a test to kind of feel out what he wanted and I'd get not a great grade. So then I'm like, okay, no problem. Adjust.
I'll do the opposite. Yeah.
And it was different the next time. I was like, if I'd done it the first time, I was like, just be consistent, dude. Anyway, it's just, I'm over it though. I'm over it.
Yeah, for sure.
Can't you tell?
It's just a little bruise.
Just a little, just a little. So, so I was a pastor's wife and a new mama all at once, basically. And had a little bit, didn't realize what it was after Audrey was born. Her birthday's in early February, but it had probably some baby blues, some postpartum depression. I remember it'd be like 4:00 in the afternoon, and I felt like life will never be the same. Like I just felt like the whole world closing in on me. And it was kind of before you really did anything about it.
People weren't talking about it.
No one talked about it. I was like,
Yeah.
Help me. I thought something was wrong with me. But thankfully, came out of that. But still, I mean, I turned 23 not long after she was born, still real young and inexperienced and still wrapped up a lot in a performance and perfectionistic and people pleasing sort of way of life. And then you throw in being a pastor's wife.
Yes, I was going to say. And then you did the cherry on top of that.
Right.
I remember holding our firstborn, and you're right. Nobody talked about baby blues or postpartum. No. It was even worse for me with Jack, our middle, than with Maggie. But I remember sitting with Maggie. She's perfect. I mean, she was almost 10 pounds. So like not frail, like Michelin baby, sleeping, eating, she needed to be fed. So, and I'm holding her. She's asleep. Like everything is perfect. The dog is laying there. He's asleep. And I am sobbing.
Oh, yeah.
And Jeff's just kind of looking at me like wide-eyed
what
and
do I
pale,
do?
like, what is happening to my wife? And I literally said through tears, nothing's wrong. And I'm so sad.
Yes.
And so I'm grateful now that it is a normalized conversation that really is very difficult for new moms. But then you were like, you know what we should do? We should pastor a church.
Why not? Why not? Why not? I'm curious because, Audrey was born in February. And so it was probably just the darkest time of the year, I feel like.
Yeah.
But then with Reed, it was like early November. And I think because there was Thanksgiving and Christmas, there were things to look forward to. So I didn't feel it as much. And then with Nora, she was born at the beginning of summer. And so I think even just going outside.
That's a really good point because my son was born at the end of January, which puts it in that darkness
it's a
spot
tough
of the
time.
year.
Yes.
Yeah, there's no more college football. There's no baseball. Like there's
so
nothing
sad.
happening in the world.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Except now you get to celebrate their birthday. That is the good thing that I like about Audrey's birthday being in early February is like, there's something fun to celebrate. So
yes.
Yeah. So became a pastor's wife. And like I said, it just was a new area that I needed to nail. I need to have it
Mhm.
together, you know?
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
probably nobody said, here's what that looks like. And so you're
Right.
literally just shooting in the dark and looking
Yes.
around for examples and
Yes.
living up to a standard that you have set.
Right. Yeah. No one set for me. Honestly, like
Yeah.
even sorry, I got distracted. You might have to edit
Love it.
this out because our
No,
neighbor kid just walked up to, I'm like, what is he doing? Okay,
I think
sorry.
that I actually love that moment.
Do
I'm not
you
going to
like
edit
that?
it
Okay,
out unless
great.
you want me to,
No,
because
this is real.
I had to reach over and grab my phone and text my husband and say, come get the dog. He is snoring.
Well, good thing I didn't even hear your dog snore.
Yeah, so Jeff has been off camera with treats and doing like a whole
I
show to
love
try
it.
and get Nash to
It's
come
like,
to
come
him.
over
So,
here. Okay, good. I'm like, okay, what is our neighbor doing? Okay,
yeah,
good.
we will not be high achievers on this
We will
podcast. We will
not.
leave it in. We will
And
leave it
that's what's
in the name of
funny
Jesus.
is like, I love authenticity. Like it's so funny. I connect more with undoneness than I do
Yes.
with
Oh,
everything, tied up in
yes.
a bow.
Yeah.
But to me, it was like everybody seemed to have it together, but
Hmm.
I did not. I
Right.
did not have it together. So, and that's what I was going to say was like Matt, he never put that on me. He always
Yeah.
was like, hey, you don't have to do anything that you don't feel the Lord calling you to do. So you don't have to run our children's program. You don't have to lead worship unless you want to lead worship, which I did. That was where I wanted to serve. He was kind of like, hey, you love our kids, take care of them, and then any other thing that you want to do, just feel the freedom and don't feel the pressure. And that's even
Yeah.
how the people of our church have always been. I've never felt this pressure of, oh, I wish Lauren would this or that. Any pressure I've felt was pressure I put on myself.
Yeah.
And so after Reed was born, Christy's definitely like a part of my story, and a part of kind of a turning point in my life where there was just some breakthrough that I needed to get to. And that came, I met her, I can't remember, I just realized I was pregnant with Audrey, like on this trip. And I think she was pregnant with Ellie. And then I met Kristen, her sister-in-law at the same
Yeah.
time. Anyway, and then we reconnected after the girls were born. And she became like my real life friend and not just the imaginary friend that I had in my head. Cause I was
Yes,
like, yeah,
totally.
Christy Knuckles and I are going to be friends.
Same. Exact same.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
And Megan tells the same
Yes.
story. But she had invited me to sing on that little EP she did called A Few Days in February.
Yes.
And
You sang my favorite song.
I love that song so much.
And I can't find it. So if you
I
have it,
can't
I need it.
either. I can't either. I know I've asked Christy, I was like, do you have any more copies of that? Because I can't.
Yeah.
My dad, I think he might have a copy of it, he's my biggest fan and my mom too. But he's like really into music. So it's so fun. But I remember, singing with her. I mean, if there is any voice that I wanted to sound like, it was Christy's voice. It was like, just copy paste. That'd be wonderful.
Yep.
But it really kept me from finding my own voice. And I remember when I got the EP back and listened to it, I hated my part. I was like, I sound terrible. What is wrong with me? Are people lying to me when they say they like me when I sing? It was like, something's wrong. And
I have to just interject. It's so funny because I did not know this part of the story.
Okay.
So that EP ended up coming out around the time that we had a thing with Passion called the Thirsty Conference. And so it was in Atlanta. And so that EP was on sale, and Christy handed it to me, and I was so excited about it. And the duet that you guys sang called "Holy Over Me," it was my anthem, and and your voice, your vocals specifically, are stunning on it. So I just want to say,
Shannon.
what an absolute dirty, rotten trick of the enemy.
Yeah.
To take that was so profound for me where I was in my life, because the line that you guys sing on that song that I needed was, your love does not depend on what I do.
Yes.
Your
Yes.
love is freedom and it pleases you.
Mm.
And I needed that as a young mom who's just trying to be perfect.
Mhm.
And I'm in ministry and my husband's in ministry and we're going to lead worship. And we're going to be perfect. And you were singing freedom over me. And at the same time, you're hearing it back and
Yeah.
thinking, this is terrible. And it's just,
Yes.
it's such deceit of the enemy.
It
And
is.
so the very thing that he comes after us about is probably the thing that is helping someone else,
Yeah,
which is why he comes
absolutely.
after it.
Absolutely.
So just know that
Thank you. I
I'm
had
literally
no
on a
idea.
quest to find the song. So if your dad
We've
has
gotta
it,
find
we're going to
it.
need to get it.
Yes. I'm going to ask him if he has it. That, and you know, it's so interesting, that line, I could sing it, but I couldn't sing it from my heart, you
Mhm.
know? And maybe that's what I do think it was the design of the enemy to discourage and destroy. But also, what if what I was hearing was the discord between my heart and my voice, you know?
Mm.
But it was that listening back to that track and being like, why am I struggling with this when everyone around me, it's kind of like the person that has body dysmorphia that looks in the mirror and just does not see in what they actually look like. And
Yeah.
our church had just started Celebrate Recovery.
Mm.
And I was in a Bible study with some other moms, and this one woman who's still in my life, I still love her, you know, just a little bit further down the road than us, who just took us under her wing. And we did Bethmore Bible studies. We did different Bible studies, but it eventually became like what I would call, what Kurt Thompson calls confessional communities. Like that's what it was, where really we'd just come and we'd just share what's going on. And we would just kind of bear witness to what's going on and pray for one another and point each other to truth. But just kind of like live the gospel towards each other. And so it was Believing God was the study, and Beth she's preaching about the Israelites being in the middle of the dry Jordan River, and the Lord instructing them to like get the stone and move into the promised land.
Yeah.
And she's like, I feel like this is a word for someone. I'm watching, you know, just watching it on video. And she was like, some of y'all just need to like move on, just move on, whatever, take that stone and you need to move on. And I mean, my heart just was like beating in my chest. I was like, I like through my chest. And I was like, I know that's what I need. I like whatever this is that I'm struggling with. I want to move forward. I feel like I've just been stuck so much in this headspace. I want to move on. And the woman that was leading the gathering, she prayed over me and prayed about like just this root of something to be pulled out fully. And so I was just like, Lord, yes, like whatever it is. And I felt like the Lord was going to give me some kind of stone or Ebenezer later that week to kind of symbolize some kind of moving on for me. And later that week, Matt had been pushing Celebrate Recovery at the church, like, hey, we're doing this. It's a new ministry. Everyone's welcome. And so we went to it was a Thursday night gathering, and the man that was preaching the message, he talked about this man being like the Lord who has this field that he wants to cultivate, but there are all these weeds in it. And so, you know, the man that owns the field starts mowing over it while the weeds pop up. And so basically this idea of getting the weeds out from the root.
By the root. Yeah.
Yes. And I was like, I start crying, and I'm like, oh gosh, you know why our neighbor was here? Because our dogs are out. Nora, go get our dogs. Our neighbor has our dogs right there. This is real life, guys.
I love everything about this right now.
Real life. Will you go
The
get them?
dogs are taking over the podcasts.
Yes, our neighbor, he's right there. Okay. I'm glad I'm sitting at this window so I could see.
Yeah,
Anyway,
that was
okay.
providential.
It was providential. Dogs, man, love them. Man's best friend, but also
Yeah,
a little
also,
of annoying.
I get phone calls when I am out of town from our neighbor that our dog has gotten
Yes!
out and has come in her
Yes!
back door, Lauren, opened her back door and came in. So Crystal, if you're listening, I'm
Oh,
telling the
thanks,
world that
Crystal.
Loretta comes to visit you.
Loretta. Oh my gosh, I love that name. Okay, so
So pulling
celebrate
it out
recovery.
by the
Yeah,
roots.
pull it
Yes.
up by the roots. And I mean, I'm just like, it is resonating so deeply with me. And Matt and I are sitting on the front row, and at the end of their time, they offer a surrender chip. Like, if this is your first time, it's a little poker chip. This is your first time at Celebrate Recovery, and the Lord just revealed an area of your life that you want to surrender to Him, come up and receive a chip. And then they have like a woman stands up to receive the women and gives them a hug. A man, he's up there for the men.
Now, were y'all just attending as we are the pastor and pastor's wife, and we're blessing this new ministry that's launching?
Yes.
Okay.
Like, we're like, hey, we're here.
Oh, yeah.
But I remember telling Matt, I want to go. I just felt like there's something for me at this meeting. I want to go. And so, yeah, we're sitting in the front row, and the surrender trip's offered, and I just sit there because I'm like battling, like, I am the pastor's wife.
Yeah.
What are people going to think? I mean, that people pleasing, just perfectionism, all that. What are people going to think? And then they move on to like the 1 month kind of, it could be like sobriety, but it's also just kind of any kind of freedom that you've experienced, or just a moment of surrender. Like, if it's been a month, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year, I can't remember the intervals. And they go through all of them. And I'm just sitting there sinking deeper and deeper. Like, I missed it. Like, why didn't I just get up? Like, why didn't I just get up and take that chip? Well, they come back around one more time and offer the surrender chip. And I mean, nothing could keep me in my seat. I went up there and I grabbed that chip and was just crying, hugged that lady, got back in my seat. And I felt like the weight of the world just fell off my shoulders. I felt the lightest I'd ever felt. And I think it was just the humility to say, God, I can't do this. I've tried to do it. And in the past, I've been able to do it. I've been able to get by. And the Lord was like, yeah, it's not going to be enough. It's not going to be enough. You've got to just surrender completely to me. All the perfectionism and people pleasing and performance, it's not going to be enough.
Yeah.
And I could not have made it, knowing, that was probably, 17, 18 years ago, and knowing what would happen the next 17, 18 years. It's like, no, I wouldn't have made it.
You could not have been a consummate people pleaser and faithfully steward what you guys have been called to. No.
Right.
And I think there's something, this kind of reminds me of when we do like child or baby dedications at church and that sort of thing. And anytime I led those, I would always say, now, just to be clear, this is not a salvation experience. Right. Like this is a symbol of committing your children to the Lord. And, but there's something profound about the visible public expression of that. Same with baptism. And so, it wasn't, you weren't surrendered if you didn't stand up and go take that chip, but there's something about the visible representation of it that kind of broke that last piece off.
Absolutely.
And I have felt the same way of like, I have to go first in this visibly. That's the hang up with me and the Lord. It's like, no, Lord, you and I will talk about that later in the prayer closet. And it's like, no, I need you to go first. And so for me, it usually shows up in like, if I'm teaching on something, I actually have to go first in saying how I've failed in it.
Oh yeah.
Before I can come around to the redemption side of it. But I just want to say that was probably the beginning of some profound leadership steps for you visibly. So thank you for sharing that. I know that Celebrate Recovery specifically, and all the different iterations and programs that exist now that are like it have been the key transformative piece for people finding freedom.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you brought up Christy, because obviously I kind of had an intersection. So I'd heard all about her friend Lauren from her, but from my dad, who's now with Jesus, he had said to me, Shannon, you got to hear this kid. That's what he called Matt. You got to hear this kid. He's a preacher, and I don't remember if he was at a conference and heard Matt. I can't recall, or if it was like a cassette or just what he'd heard him on.
There are cassettes.
But he's like, you got to hear this kid, Matt Chandler. And then I think Matt came to Passion when I was on staff at Passion and spoke at Passion. And that was when kind of everything clicked for me. But when I realized that you guys were together, I started following a blog that you were writing. And shortly thereafter was when Matt was diagnosed with brain cancer. And so that was really when I was all in. So I already had the holy over me moment. And then my dad saying, you got to hear this kid who's preaching the gospel, and then realizing you guys went together. So, the name of this podcast is Everything Made Beautiful.
Yeah.
And when I was praying about guests, your name came to mind for a host of reasons, but really remembering the day in and day out of that journey with Matt. Would you mind just sharing a little bit of that? Gosh, it feels like 100 years ago and yesterday.
Yeah.
But for people that don't know about that journey, I'd just love for you to share how you saw God make everything beautiful.
Yeah, no, because in the midst of it, well, I mean, I think it goes back to even having gone through Celebrate Recovery and I did the steps, and the Lord was you just never know what he's preparing you for. And so it's always best to yield to whatever he's leading you in. And so I think if I hadn't wrestled through some of that, I ended up actually also experienced a couple of miscarriages. And I think that was also kind of preparing the soil of my heart for what was coming. So Thanksgiving Day, 2009, my kids were, Nora, our youngest, was 6 months old. Reed was 4 and Audrey was 6. And I was getting stuff ready to take over to my mom's house for Thanksgiving dinner and heard a commotion in the living room, and come to find out Matt was having a grand mal seizure. He had just put Nora in her little Johnny jump up, praise the Lord. And the other 2 kids were just sitting in there watching like the TV, and ended up a scan revealed that he had a tumor in his brain. We ended up going to a neurosurgeon, and he was like, hey, this does not look good. And it was in his right frontal lobe. And he was like, I've made space in my schedule to get it out like at the end of this week. So he was like, he thought, I mean, we need to get this out now. And that was tough, because I felt really, Matt kind of jokes, he was like, well, yeah, it wasn't your brain, but I felt really convicted that this is what we need to do. Like, you've got to get this thing out. Like, it needs to be out of your head. It does not belong. And so we found out on a Tuesday. Friday was the surgery. And, there was like, we didn't know, would he come back like himself? Would he be able to speak? Would he be able to reason? Like, would he be just a shadow of the man he was? Like, what would be preserved? Would his personality change? We just didn't know. And so, but we did have a piece that the surgery needed to happen. And so he had an 8-hour craniotomy, and they were able to get everything. I mean, it's crazy. Everything, all these margins. And what was cool is the surgeon was a strong believer. We still keep in contact with him. He doesn't do brain surgery anymore. He's focusing more on, like, I guess, neck and back stuff, but I don't blame him, because, man, it's hard to have these patients and work on them, and not everybody turns out like Matt, And so I remember seeing him in the recovery room in the neuro ICU and wondering like, what's he going to be like? And he was there, like he was cracking jokes. He was, and it was so, there've been different moments in my life, not very many, where I've felt two things at the same time that seem opposed to each other. One, there was no place I'd rather be than sitting right beside him with his head all wrapped up with gauze and he's weak. But also at the same time, like kind of wanting to just run away and just bawl my eyes out, and just not want to deal with this, but of course I stayed and I wanted to stay. I wanted to be there with him. And in fact, there are times, it's, I would say the fog of war where I was like, man, I wish I'd spent more time with the kids during that time. Cause I know that was some instability for them, but I just knew there was nowhere else I wanted to be than with Matt. So I spent a lot of time. I stayed there at night. They had a hotel in the hospital. I stayed there. My friend that led the Bible study, she came one night and they had like 2 twin beds in there and she would just pray me to sleep every night. And so, each day he got a little better, but I mean, there were times where I'm like, how is he going to be? Is he going to be able to, like, he had a lot of weakness. And there's a real funny story. He also, I think part of it was the drugs. He just, wasn't thinking clearly. But it was remember when you could tweet by texting Twitter on your phone?
Uh-huh.
Do you remember that? Okay. So he got his phone, which he was not supposed to have.
Oh.
He was not supposed to have his phone. And he tweeted, this is what he was going to tweet. He was going to tweet, it's a lot harder to pee in a cup than you think it is. He was going to tweet that. So problem number 1. Problem number 2 is that because his I think his left side was weak because of all the surgery of where the location of the tumor was. It would like his hand would kind of lay on things and he didn't know it was laying on there. He just didn't have as much awareness. And so it was just like nonsense. Like the tweet he sent was nonsense. And we had some friends that they were like, they saw it on Twitter and they were like, oh my gosh, he's gone. Like the fact that he looked at his phone and was like, yeah, that's what I want to put, and sent it. They're like, he's gone. And
He'll
they just
never
were
be the
weeping
same.
together. He'll never be the same. But he ended up like just gaining strength and he did inpatient rehab and it was a long recovery. He did chemo. It ended up being malignant. So it was a grade 3 oligodendroglioma. I remember when the doctor just wanted to tell me, and then the man that was a chairman of the elders at the village, just so he could know kind of what plan to make, because Matt was one of the lead pastors of the church, the main teaching pastor. And so we were the only 2 that the doctor told when he got the results that it was grade 3 and it was malignant. And they didn't want us to share it with Matt yet because he needed to focus on recovery. They just didn't want him to have to think about that. And so that was probably the hardest moment of that entire time. Was I had to make the decision, do I keep this with me or do I tell his parents and my parents? And I really had this strong conviction that I wanted him to know before everybody else.
Yeah.
One, I felt like that was dignifying to him. 2, I didn't want everybody to have to carry that weight with me. Yeah. And so what was hard was that's a decision I would have come to Matt. Like, what do you think? Is this the right decision? Do you think I'm making the right choice here? And I couldn't. And so it was one of the first times that, him being older than me, him being a little bit further in his walk with the Lord, even though I'd been a Christian longer, he just gained a lot more traction than I had. And I respected him it was one of the first times I had to just kind of stand on my own, and it was really good. It was really good for me, because as much as it's good to depend on our husbands like that and to lean on them, like I think that's a good thing. Ultimately, I have to lean on the Lord. And so that was a really tough week, but I made it through, and I'm grateful for kind of that mini trial, that mini crucible that the Lord put me in, because I think I needed a push. I think I can, even though I do like to be a high achiever, I do like to perform, I'm also a little lazy. And I'm like, hey, if someone else can lead this thing, I'm good to just sit in the background, as long as they lead well in the way that I want them to lead.
Right, exactly.
And so sometimes I can sit back, and I felt like this just kind of pushed me out a little bit out of my comfort zone. And so he went through chemo, radiation for 18 months of chemo, 6 weeks of radiation, and he would get scans every other month and then every 6 months. And each scan, probably for the first 2 years, is always like holding our breath, not really holding our breath, but like pleading with the Lord. We know you're good no matter what, but please give us a clean scan.
Yeah.
And then he has been cancer-free ever since. And we will be 15 years from that Thanksgiving Day this Thanksgiving.
Wow. Well, first of all, we're so thankful.
Yes.
But I do want to say that watching you walk that out, our kids are the same ages, like, 3 kids, we're about the same age, and just watching you walk that road of suffering and doing it with God's sovereignty in view. And then how you've both spoken about it since. It's like you said, God's good, full stop.
Yeah.
But also, if we could have a clean scan, so thank you for sharing that. I hope it will be encouraging to people who are currently in that season, either of cancer or some other illness, and something that feels so uncertain. That God is good, full stop.
That's right.
But he's also healer, and he's in control, and he's working and moving even when it's so scary. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about, were you going to say something? I don't want to cut you off.
Well, I was just going to say, and he already knows what you want, but anyone listening right now, just like, don't be ashamed to ask. That it's not a lack of faith for you. I think there are certain faith traditions that we can ascribe to that are like, well, whatever his will is, be okay with it. But it's kind of like, well, I think we can ask, and I think we can call God on his promises and remind him of his character, because he knows it. And it's good for us to be reminded of his character, and that he's not like us as parents, where we're so tired when our kids, ask us the same thing over and over. And we're like, are you kidding me? He's like, oh no. Okay. Yeah. Ask me again. Ask me, annoy me. I can't be annoyed,
Yeah.
And so I would want to just say, hey, it doesn't make you less of a Christian or less of a faithful Christian to ask for the healing, to ask for what you want in that in particular.
Yeah. So good. Yes, I second that. Ask out loud, claim promises. That's what they're there for. I do want to tell everybody, Lauren is such a phenomenal worship leader, vocalist, singer, and she has music. She and Christy led worship together at If Gathering this year, and I got to be there, and it was such a sweet experience. So I'll link all of her stuff in the show notes, but don't sleep on Lauren's music when we start talking about her books, because her music is transcendent and you need it. But I do want to talk about your books, because you have written 2 children's books, and I have been playing with that idea in my head. So I would just love to know what made you go, I want to write children's books. And then we'll talk about your books for adults after that. But tell us about the 2 kids' books.
Okay. So it's not as, wonderful. It's like, I don't have this, like the Lord put this on my heart. It was more of, I'd written a trade book for adults, and then I'd written a Bible study from that trade book. And I knew it was time to birth something else, but I didn't know what it was exactly. And this publisher had reached out. I was at a conference and they were like, hey, can we get together? And I just remember thinking the only thing that could tempt me is a children's book. That's the only thing. Like, that's the only thing I can wrap my mind around. And when we got together, the one thing they wanted me to do was write a children's book. And I was like, okay,
So good.
Lord, loud and clear. Got it. And so it was for the Good Book Company, and they had a series already. And they kind of asked me, were there some things that you helped your kids walk through when Matt had cancer? And honestly, it wasn't so overt. It was more just like leaning into the grace of God, one foot forward, trying to make it as normal as possible for my kids, to remind them that God's good, to continue to go to church, show up, disciple them. But there was one story that ministered to me personally that came to mind, and that was the story of Jesus with Mary and Martha when Lazarus has died.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd ever, when your world's turned upside down, I think I thought, oh, well, my faith will be strong enough that God's good, that I'll just kind of suffer through it, and almost emotionless. And there was something, and just like the Lord's up there saying, hey, I got you. Don't worry. There's no reason to cry. I got this. But instead, in John 11, when Jesus is met with Mary and Martha, who've just lost their brother, and Jesus wasn't there. For 4 days, he wasn't there. Instead of giving them a lecture, he did remind them of, I'm the resurrection and the life, but then he also wept with them. Yeah. And there was something about that, just seeing Jesus, the human, God, Jesus being fully God, fully human, just Jesus in his humanity, being overwhelmed with grief or anger. I don't know all the emotions that he felt in that moment, but I can imagine them, and that he humbled himself to just weep with Mary and Martha. I just loved that. And so wrote a book about it, called Goodbye to Goodbyes, about Jesus and Lazarus and Mary and Martha, and that one day we will say goodbye to goodbyes forever. For those who are friends of Jesus, we will say goodbye to goodbyes forever. And I had no idea when I was writing it that I was writing kind of a grief book for kids. And it's been really neat to hear all kinds of stories of parents reading this book to their kids, weeping as they're reading it. Yeah. Because they end up being ministered to in that. So that's one of my I'm so grateful that I got to write that book and that they asked me. And then the second one came out in a couple of years ago. It's called Praise Him. I had written actually a song. And when I wrote the song, I had my kids in mind of what's a song that I just want them to remember. And just this idea of praising God kind of every part of our day, which could also be laid on every season of our life. So the beginning of our day, when everything's like hopeful and you just, the world is your oyster, to the middle of the day when you're like, things are just kind of ho-hum and I'm kind of tired and everything didn't turn out the way that I thought it would. And then, the idea of just the nighttime when things are uncertain and scary. And so anyway, I wrote this song, and then I was approached by another publisher. Like, we want you to write a children's book, and threw out some ideas. And then one of the people said, what about this song, Praise Him? Do you think, I think it could make a good children's book, if we tweak some of the language. And I was like, yes, I could totally get behind that. And so wrote Praise Him, just basically took the song and adjusted it, made it more for like 3 to 5-year-olds. And I got to pick the illustrator, and I loved what she did. And what was neat is she wove elements that were special to me that she didn't even know were special, like this little cardinal female and male that are through the whole book, and cardinals are real like dear to me. I love, they're one of my favorite birds. And so, that's how Praise Him came to be. And it's another book that I'm really grateful that I got to put out there into the world.
Yeah, they're so sweet. And as parents, I think we're always looking for good content for our kids. Not just video content, but written content. So thank you for putting those in the world. Yeah. I read your book, Steadfast Love. That was so good. I'm going to link that. Talk to us though, before we wrap up. You wrote a Bible study called With Us in the Wilderness, which is so good. But it is on the book of Numbers. And when I think about Bible studies that women want to write, I've literally never had anyone say, I cannot wait to write on Numbers. So tell us a little bit about With Us in the Wilderness, because it's really so good. And I want to encourage women to get this Bible study, because it's talking about something so important, but there's just not a lot. There's not a lot of content out there specifically on Numbers that isn't a commentary. So tell us about it.
Yeah, I was doing a Bible reading plan and got to Numbers, and normally it's kind of like that's where I'm kind of lose the interest. It's like one of those major speed bumps in your Bible reading plan. But this time I was reading it, I was like, there's some really interesting narratives in this book, and I'm seeing it just started. It was my curiosity. I'm a very curious person. Google is my best friend, because I'm like, oh, I wonder, and then I can look it up, and then that I'm just down the rabbit hole at that point. And so as I'm looking at Numbers, there are just some really fascinating stories that I was not easily able to interpret on the surface, but so I was just more curious. And as I dug in, I thought, man, there's some real good stuff in here that I think all the censuses and all the names and numbers, they are meaningful because they were real people. Yes. But also it can trip you up, and you can get, lose the forest for the trees. And so I wanted to write a study on it that made it accessible for women. It could be accessible for men too, but as a woman, I thought I was thinking of women as I wrote it. I just wanted to help them, like, hey, you can do this, and I'm going to draw some parallels for you. But like, this is worthy and doable work. Yeah. And when I got to the end of it, when I read the rest of Scripture, including, if not especially, the New Testament, you see all these shadows from Numbers, probably that Exodus generation, Exodus and Numbers. And it really brought a greater spectrum of color to the New Testament, like more texture, more colors. And so I love the Old Testament. And I think a lot of it is narrative. Yes, there are some names and lots of numbers that don't necessarily mean a lot to us, but they do show us the character of God, and they are a place that we can see ourselves in. And so I wanted women to be able to do that, and to see the parts that we might miss in the New Testament because we're not familiar with the Old.
Yeah, it's so good. And if it's in there, it's on purpose, and it's for us.
Yeah.
And so I agree with you. I think, we get to start getting to Leviticus and Numbers in our Bible reading plans, and we're like, well, it was fun while it lasted.
It was a good try. Yeah.
let's just go back to the thing where what day of the, month is it? Proverbs. Yay.
Yes.
So thank you for that. I do want to
Yeah.
encourage you guys. I have this study. It is a great study. Get it. I will link it in the
Thank
show
you.
notes. And I will link to all of Lauren's, her website, her books and Bible studies, her music. They are worth your time. And I will just shouting out her husband, Matt Chandler,
Yeah.
lead pastor of the Village Church. His messages, he preaches the gospel and does it
Yeah.
in a way that's accessible and understandable, and with passion. He
Yeah.
preaches the gospel. So all of that is worth your
Yes.
time. But before we go, I'm going to ask you the question that I ask all my guests.
Mhm.
Okay. So if you could craft your perfect, beautiful day,
Mhm.
what would it look like from start to finish?
Mhm.
And the one caveat I give is if you have allergies or something that prevents you from like eating your favorite foods or whatever, that doesn't have to be part of your perfect day. It can
Right.
literally be perfect.
Yes. Okay. I love that. Probably I would wake up at our river cabin. So we have this property out on the Brazos River. So like if you've seen the show 1883, some of their they filmed some of that out near us. And so it's rural, it's kind of like hill country, hilly. We've got a bluff across. And I would wake up to the smell of coffee and bacon. And that would be like probably just my family there. And I would just slowly sip my coffee. I would see painted buntings. I would see the bald eagle that comes over. I would see deer and aoudad. I'd see all the wild animals coming out.
And cardinals.
And cardinals. God, I can't forget the cardinals. Also like summer tanagers there. I saw blue indigo bunting the other day. Anyway, all the birds. And then I would probably just maybe go fishing, little bit of fly fishing on the river right there. Then I'd probably have just all my sweet friends come over for lunch, and I would have my friend Marty B, who owns a restaurant in the area called Marty B's, and they make a really good steak, and he would make that steak, and I'd probably have a baked potato and green beans and a salad. I mean, I love that. Probably some banana pudding for dessert. And then, gosh, just spending time with them out at the river. And then just have that same thing for dinner. And then stargaze, like the stars would just be perfect. And that would be, and the weather would be like in the upper 60s. So I kind of need like a jacket, but still the sun feels warm on me. And we do like a little campfire under the stars, and I would like see some shooting stars, find all the constellations, and like just kind of go to sleep hearing all the night sounds that sound nothing like the city. So that would be my perfect day, and that's actually pretty achievable. So
yeah, you
I
should
need to
do it.
this. I need to do this. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's so good. Lauren, thank you for this today.
Mm-hmm.
I knew so much of that and was inspired again, just hearing you tell it. And I'm grateful for the way that you steward your story and your willingness to share it. And I know it has been an encouragement to a host of people today. So thank you for being willing to be on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Shannon. I loved hearing parts of your story that I haven't heard yet, that it sounds like we have more to talk about.
Yes, we'll go to the beach again and
Let's
dish.
do it.
That'll be fun.
I'm in.
Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. We are so grateful to be able to spend every Monday with you. And I hope that you will look for all of the ways that God is right now currently making everything beautiful, including you. So we will see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for Everything Made Beautiful. We are so grateful for your willingness to tune in. Be sure to follow, rate, and download the podcast, and check out the show notes for additional links and resources from today's episode. You can follow Everything Made Beautiful podcast on Instagram and Facebook, and can subscribe to Shannon's writing on Substack. This information and more is available at shannonsuzannescott.com. See you next time.